Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 3. This is our Property Valuation 2 subject. This is our first session for the day. Before we go into, firstly, I just want to lay down what will be happening today. And I think if you look at your subject guide and all the other information that is already on Blackboard, I want to state clearly that this session mostly, I usually, like I stated actually also in the previous session, the third block session, I indicated that at that time I was giving out all the relevant information, especially most practical application subjects, so that we leave the fourth contact session to revision. So in this session, mostly we're not going to do so much new stuff. I only intend to take you through the overview of what this subject has all been about, and then remind you of what were the major intended outcomes of the subject based on what we've already covered. So that is basically our major activity for this block session. You already have all the other important information. And if I could restate, valuation 2 is more about commercial valuations. So I'd want to believe we've covered commercial valuations, both the theory and the practical aspect of commercial valuations, and then the cost method of valuation, which we've also covered quite extensively. So at this stage, basically, we're just going to look at other smaller topics that I thought you just needed to know, which are covered in our prescribed textbook, before we start doing the overview revision of the whole subject. Okay. So for those of you that have got the prescribed textbook, if you look at the textbook carefully, you realize that we've covered almost all the topics in this textbook, except just 2 very small chapters, which I want to briefly talk about before we go into the major revision for this session. So if you look at the table of contents in this textbook, today we are going to look at chapter number 4, chapter 4 and chapter 5. And as you can see, these are very, very short topics. So chapter 4 talks about potential and its influence on value, whereas chapter 5 talks about the concept of highest and best use of a property. These are, as you may realize at this stage, these are very, very common and widely used terms in valuation. So we need to know at this stage really when we talk about the potential of a property, what does it mean? And when we talk about the concept of highest and best use, what do we refer to? Okay. So our first chapter of discussion is potential and its influence on value. Chapter 4. Okay. So if you've got the book with you, I'm going to just take you through this short chapter and then just read key points within the chapters and then elaborate on a few of those terms that I feel you should take note of. First and foremost, when you are valuing a property, it's always assumed that you take potential into consideration. So first and foremost, know exactly what is meant by the word potential. This book defines potential as something that is existing in undeveloped form, latent, coming into existence or activity, comma, having inherent but unused powers, expressing possibility. Maybe before I even read what this book, what do you understand by the word potential? In your own terms, because I look at this definition as much more confusing.
Potential.
Mm.
Maybe what you can get out of that property more than what it is having now.
What you can get out of the property more than what you can get, yes, in your own words, that's acceptable. But really, potential is something that is hidden. At the time that you are probably looking at if probably we talk about potential, generally speaking, it's something latent, something inherent in something that cannot be seen at that particular point in time. Yeah, it's something like hidden. It's got these special capabilities which cannot be so obvious at a certain point in time. So that is basically the same concept with potential when we relate it to property. When we are valuing a property, we are not going to basically value it based on its existing use only. So you have to take into consideration its other alternative possibilities that property can be used for. So generally speaking, that's what the term potential refers to. So when you are doing evaluation of a property, you are only not going to limit yourself to the current or the existing use of the property. You also have to put in mind the other possibilities for which this property can also be utilized for. However, you need to be very, very conscious of certain things. Potential does not exist on its own. Oftentimes, actually, it's said that potential is a legal term. As you know, the rights of a property are usually controlled by so many other
Schemes.
exactly. So that potential itself should not just be like a pipe dream. So that potential is usually regulated or controlled by the legal limitations of that property. So the concept of potential is usually discussed side by side with the concept of highest and best use. It's the same thing. When we're talking about highest and best use, we are assuming that use which is going to result into the highest value for that property. So that use in itself should not just be any other use that you think of from your head. It should be a use that should be permitted within the legal restrictions of the property. So that is how the concept of potential works. So potential in itself should not be like wishful thinking. No. So when you're looking or when you are deciding on the potential of a property, you look at the potential relative to the legal rights of that property. I think that's the most important term about potential. So then, what are the legal rights that a property, what are the legal rights which may influence the property? Some of the common legal rights for the property are the real rights, the conditions of title, as well as the town planning scheme regulations, such as zoning, and then the planning restrictions. Those are the legal rights of the property. The zoning, the coverages, the floor area ratios. So all those things need to be in your assumption or in your analysis of the potential of that property. You need to know that mostly potential does not exist on its own. It is usually determined by the legal rights of that property. Yeah. So that is, I think, the very, very general and elaborate definition of potential and its influence on value. So in short, when you are investigating the potential of that property, you are looking beyond the present use of that property. So you are looking at other likely possible uses to which that property can be put to. However, those uses must be legally permissible. And that's why, generally speaking, even the book says that potential is usually a legal term. Anything that is, for you to claim for any property to be assumed to have any other potential besides its current use, make sure that you convince yourself that whatever potential you're looking at is something that is likely to be permitted within the legal restrictions of the property. Okay. So that is, I think, the general definition of potential, and definition-wise, very, very simple. The one that is in this textbook looks a bit confusing, but it's pure English. Potential is something that is hidden, latent. Hidden, that is not seen at the time that you are considering. Something that is hidden, that has got the possibility of being exploited at another time. But that exploited use needs to be also conform with the general legal rights of the property. Okay. So that is the general overview of the concept of potential. I'm looking at the notes also on page 45. In practical terms, the difference between the present use of a property and its highest and best use is the potential of that property. This is a good amplification as well. So you see, the potential of the property can also then be, in other ways, described as the difference between its current use and its highest and best use. You get that one? So the highest and best use can be the most probable use that can result into the highest value of that property. Then if that property of yours is, at the time, the current or the existing use does not result into the highest present value of that property, then it has got some existing potential. Basically, that's why. So there is a gap, that unseen, unutilized features of the property which could take it now to result into its highest value. That is basically another very, very good illustration of the concept of potential. It's the difference between the highest and best use of the property and its present use or current use. Very good. Okay, which is the other word that I could talk to? Legal concept of potential. We've already said potential is usually a legal term. The use of the term potential in property valuation is primarily a legal concept that has been the subject of many considerations, not only in our courts, but also by the courts throughout the capitalist. Okay, that is page 45. So the concept of potential is basically a legal concept. So the land is not to be valued merely by reference to the use to which it is being put at the time at which the value is to be determined, but also by reference to the uses to which it is reasonably capable of in the future. So that now connects you now to the general concept of the highest and best use. So in valuation, they say you do not value the property only based on what it is being used. So you always have to value a property based on its highest and best use. That is now where you need to take into consideration the aspect of its complete potentialities.
Okay. Can I ask, let me say there is a general residential property, but then it's in the CBD, but then you...
General residential in the CBD, yes.
But then you will only value it as a general residential. Or would you also take into consideration that converting it into, or rezoning it into office space?
Yeah. I think that's where now the whole trick about valuation with the concept of highest and best use comes into play. So when you have, first and foremost, when you are looking at the property based on its existing use, before you can apply that aspect of potential, you first need to do further investigation to see exactly if in that property that you are looking at, are there possibilities of its current legal rights being changed? In this aspect, mostly the legal rights that we're talking about in property is mostly the rezoning. Are there possibilities of this property being rezoned? So first and foremost, you need to do that investigation with the municipalities. If there are any future plans for such properties located in such places to be rezoned, then that potential becomes fulfilled. Then you could add some premium for that potential. If there is no possibility of rezoning, then that potential may never be utilized. Yes. So that is just the first and foremost. Potential or highest and best use concept should not be like a guesswork or speculative. You first need to do your further investigation to establish exactly if your acclaimed potential is actually capable of being physically implemented. So that is basically the one difficult aspect on the concept of highest and best use. Other people use it as for speculative purposes.
Which is not a fair.
Which is exactly. Otherwise, it's an internationally accepted principle, which is very, very acceptable in evaluation. But it has to be proven. That potential has to be proven. There are a lot of case laws that talk about the potential of the property and what the courts have said about how potential should be utilized.
Okay.
Otherwise, as a concept, really, should not be wishful thinking. Yeah. So, potential is only acceptable or admissible when there are tangible convictions that certain real rights on this property can be changed in order to fulfill the highest and best use of that property. That's basically how it works. So that's what happens even in valuation, like I was saying, in valuation cycles. Oftentimes, you are advised to value a property based on its highest and best use. That's why even in your valuation reports, you remember, if you do remember, in the structure of the valuation report, there is a section which talks about highest and best use of the property. Yeah. So in that section, that's where now you need to look at the present use of the property, then look at the real rights of the property, and then make a comment whether the property is being used to its highest and best use, or if there is unutilized potential. Yeah, especially in commercial properties. Those planning control factors, if those are not fully utilized, then that is an exploited potential. Then you can give some extra value for that. Yes. So that is a very, very standard concept. The value of the property, you are not going to value the property based on the way it is, the existing current use. You need also to put potential into consideration. It's possible highest and best use, which could result into the highest and best value. Okay, so I'm now looking at page 46. The land is not to be valued merely by reference to the use to which it is being put at the time at which its value is to be determined, but also by reference to the uses to which it is reasonably capable of in the future. Yeah, that's where the concept of potential and highest and best use comes in. So in examining the legal limitations of potential, we are concerned primarily with the real rights, those registered against the title deeds, and those that are binding on the successor of the title, e.g. servitudes and long leases. So that's what I'm saying. Potential is a legal concept. It's mostly, it looks at the real rights of the property. So whatever real rights exist on that property, in you working out that potential, I need to consider those things to see exactly if they can be changed in order to fulfill your assumed potential. If not, then there is no potential for that property. We are also concerned with restrictions imposed by statutory bodies such as zoning. That's what I said earlier on. So potential is all about zoning, and then with all its control factors, you remember all the control factors in town planning scheme, as well as the other real rights such as servitudes and long leases that could be on the property. So all those need to be considered. So please look at, there are so many, like as I'm repeating myself, there are so many court judgments which illustrate the concept of potential. So please take your time and look at some of those court judgments to see exactly how they illustrate the concept of potential. Which is the other? So I think roughly you read chapter 4. The whole of chapter 4, it's only best, I think, about 10 pages or so. It talks about potential and its influence on value, but what I've said is the general meaning and the general use of the term potential in relation to properties. Simply put, potential is the difference between the current or the existing use of the property and its highest and best use of the property. Yeah. So if the property of, if your property, the current use of your property is not its highest and best use, then there is a gap. So that gap is now the potential value of that property. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Clear. So connected to potential now will be chapter. That's number 1. Number 2, highest and best use of the property. I've been using this term chapter 5. I've been using this term so much as we were discussing potential, so you can as well, you already know what the highest and best use means. And I know this is the term that we started with from first year. We looked at this term, but I want you to further have an in-depth knowledge of what that term means. At this stage, I know that you all know the definition of highest and best use. Simply put, it's just that use of the property that results in to the most optimal value for the property. Highest present value of the property. That is the highest and best use. So look at chapter 5. Chapter 5 talks about the concept of highest and best use. Please know the definition of highest and best use. There are many definitions. Page 54 talks about the concept of highest best use defined as the optimum likely use. Are you writing? The optimum likely use to which land can be most advantageously exploited within all the restrictions imposed. The optimum likely use to which land can be most advantageously exploited within all the restrictions imposed upon its use by law. Are you there?
Yeah.
Due regard being had to the possibility of their modification or removal. Due regard being had to the possibility of their modification or removal. That's basically what is referred to as the highest and best use. It's the optimum likely use to which land can be most advantageously be exploited. The optimum likely use to which land can be most advantageously exploited within all the restrictions imposed upon its use by law, due regard being had to the possibility of their modification or removal. Okay. So basically that's now the concept of highest and best use. That use assumes the best use which results into the most optimum or the best property market value for that property. So then the difference between the highest and best use and the existing use of the property now is that the potential of the property. So you are in your valuation, you are required to look at the existing or the present use of the property, then make a comment whether the present use of the property is its highest and best use. If the present use of the property is not its highest and best use, then it has got some potential, unutilized potential. So it's the present use plus the potential which results into the highest and best use of the property. Yes. So the concept of highest and best use also now is defined mostly by 3, if not 4 criteria. The use that you are going to assume for the property, for it to be highest and best use, this also concept should not be speculative. So that use which you are going to assume for the property, being the highest and best use, is limited by 3 defined criteria. That use needs to be 1, legally permissible. Number 2, it has to be physically possible. Number 4, number 3 should be economically possible. And connected to that one should be maximally, what do they call it? Maximally productive. This is just the same as that one. Okay. So in assuming the highest and best use of a property, it has to be in line with those 3 criteria. First and foremost is the term of legal permissibility. What do we mean when we talk about the property being legally permissible or the use being legally permissible? Like we are talking about when we talked about potential, the legality of the property is defined by the legal restrictions that fall on the property. So there are so many legal restrictions which influence a property. So if you look at page 58, what does it say about the legally permissible property? In determining the highest and best use of a property, whether or not such use is legally permissible, it's usually the determination in determining highest and best use of a property, whether or not such use is legally permissible, is usually investigated first. You see? So the highest and best use can only be practicable or practical if the legal use of that property is permitted, before you even look at the physical and the economic aspects. Because property, the use of the property is defined by its legal limitations, the zoning, as well as the real rights that are on that property. So when looking at the concept of highest and best use, the legal rights are firstly examined. If the legal rights of that property are not legally permissible, then the all physical permissibility and economic permissibility will not even apply.
Yeah.
So it's first the legal.
So they are secondary to that.
Exactly. So you first and foremost look at the legal restrictions of the property. So usually investigated first for little is to be gained if the legal constraints on the development cannot be removed. You see? If the legal constraints on this on the property cannot be removed, then it does not, nothing else can apply on the economic and the physical aspect. So then what are the legal limitations on the property? It's basically what we've been talking about already. The legal limitations on the property will be the real rights. Here we are going to talk about servitudes. Long leases. Even bonds. Bonds are also real rights. They are registered. So real rights have to be investigated first. If those real rights cannot be changed in order to pave way for the highest and best use of the property, then those it cannot be utilized in that what we think could be its highest and best use. Yeah. So the second one would be the zoning. We've already talked about that. The town planning scheme, town planning scheme, not scheme. Town planning scheme restrictions and the zoning. Highest and best use on the legal front will apply if there are possibilities, like in the example that you gave earlier. If there are possibilities of applying for rezoning or to waive all those other planning restrictions. Also, there are also personal rights. Yes. Rights, title conditions could come in the real rights.
Okay.
Yes.
Or personal rights.
Personal rights the book refers to personal rights. One of the examples of personal rights is a usufruct. A usufruct is a right which a person has on the benefits of a property. It's also a right.
Yeah.
So it has also to be considered. Okay. So those are the three major factors that you need to investigate when you are investigating the legal permissibility of your property in terms of the highest and best use concept. So legal limitations are categorized as real rights, personal rights, as well as zoning. These are the things that you need to investigate first when you are considering the highest and best use of the property. So it's only when, like you said, only when you've discovered that there are possibilities of changing this, can you then claim to have the potential, can you claim for this property to have another exploited potential. If this cannot be changed, then that potential cannot be utilized. Okay. So know exactly the different meanings of those real rights. I think, if I remember very well, we are second years. Did you do law with me? Law on property valuation? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Last year, yes.
Last year, yeah.
Yes. I'd want to believe we talked about this. I normally talk about this in the law on property real rights. But at this stage I know that those are not new concepts to use. So know exactly what real rights are. Know what personal rights are. Zoning you already know. So that is very, very well covered in our textbook on page 58 and 59. So when you are when you are looking at the concept of highest and best use, first and foremost, look at the legal permissibility criteria of that property. And under the legal permissibility criteria, you look at three aspects: the real rights of the property, which refers to the servitudes, long leases and bonds, then the zoning of that property, and then the personal rights. So it's only when these rights are, it's only when there is a possibility of changing these rights can you then assume to say that this property is legally permissible, or the rights on that property is legally permissible. Okay. Secondly, physical permissibility is another criteria. So when you are assuming the highest and best use of that property, that use needs to be physically permissible. What does the book say about physically permissible? Physically permissible, physically feasible. That is covered on page 55. The physical development of a site is limited in many ways. So firstly, there are the physical characteristics of the site itself, e.g., for example, the area, the frontage, the depth, the slopes, whether low-lying, elevated, or founding. These characteristics, individually or combined, will determine whether or not a specific development proposal is physically feasible. This one is very easy. So what we mean by physically possible or feasible is the use, that highest and best use that you are contemplating in your mind should be for a use that is capable of being sustained based on the physical nature of the land on which that property is situated. Yeah. And the physical nature of the land that now is basically what we refer to things like the size of the land, the slope, the topography of the land, the contours. So you cannot assume a use of the land that is not practically possible to be built on this piece of land based on its physical nature. Is it making sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Straight.
Maybe I wanted to share also. I understand there is a building in the city center in Windhoek.
Mm-hmm.
It's lying open maybe 3 years now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's built up, huh?
No, they demolished the old building.
Uh-huh.
So, and they dug up, they excavated it.
Mm-hmm.
So with the intention maybe
to rebuild,
yeah,
to redevelop
to redevelop
the site.
and to put 2 floors down
Okay.
underground.
Yeah.
There's a vein of water there.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
they can't do anything.
Exactly.
So the potentiality which was determined,
which was thought of, it was exactly. So they didn't do that investigation properly.
yeah.
So physically, you cannot build underneath when the soil is so unstable. It's waterlogged.
It's waterlogged.
Exactly. That's a very good
So
example.
those 2 floors, it's a requirement for you to.
Exactly. You see, but they are not physically possible based on the condition of the site.
They are not physically possible.
Exactly. So that building now with the 2 floors underneath or whatever basement is not the highest and best use of that land because it's not physically
Possible.
Yeah. Good example.
And they paid for the land.
Exactly. And so probably the funny thing, if they are not smart enough, they paid for the land based on the highest and best use value.
Yes.
With considering that it is
Physically possible.
to convert it into the highest and best use.
Yeah.
That's why now you people become extremely important. It's always advisable when you are taking a very, very important project that you consult professionals because they will tell you this. Yeah. If somebody doesn't do his investigation, those are the consequences.
But now I was thinking at what stage or how could have these guys really have seen that? So he was supposed to conduct what?
I should have done a feasibility study, a physical feasibility.
A fully fledged one.
Yes. To see whether the land that, especially, I would want to assume at that stage the development was very big. It's a big development they wanted to put there. They should have done that's where the soil survey also becomes important.
Yeah, soil survey.
Before you develop a very, very big structure, it's always good that you do your geotechnic survey
Yeah.
to establish exactly the condition of the superstructure, the substructure rather,
Yeah.
the soil.
Mm.
Whether that soil is strong enough to
Carry the building.
to carry the load that you are contemplating.
Yeah.
That is extremely important.
Mm.
If you don't do that, those are the consequences. So you realize now they cannot use it to what they thought they could.
I understand that guy, the first guy, after realizing it, he sold it
It's-
further to the Chinese. So the Chinese
So-
are sitting with that now.
You see? So before you waste your money, please, I think it's always it pays.
Desperation is also a problem, actually.
Speculation.
And
It's all speculation. So-
desperation also.
Yeah.
They were desperate to get the land.
The land. And well, they were desperate to get the land with the intention of making, or redevelop it so to make maximum profit
Maximum profit.
without doing their own
Groundwork.
groundwork properly.
Mm.
That's a good one. So, for the concept of highest and best use to be in existence also, that use which you assume for the property should be a use which is physically possible based on the ground physical condition of your site. Okay. And then economically possible. Economically possible, from the definition of whatever. Economically possible basically refers highest and best use. Economically feasible also means that use basically is going to be to result into the highest and most feasible, maximum productive, resulting into the highest economic value for that property,
Okay.
which is highest value basically.
Yeah,
Economics is economics, it's all about money. So that use definitely is going to result into the
So
most
that's why you
optimum
can.
value.
That's where you do the part of the valuation there of how can I understand it.
Hmm?
Is it the
Yes.
part where you produce
This
now the-
exactly. This is what where this is now based on the value of the property.
Yeah.
Highest and best use may not be they do not make sense if your current use is higher than your highest and best use.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't even work that way. So it's highest and best use because it's going to result into the maximum or optimal value or maximum value or maximum value. That's why it is now the highest and best use. But please, I want to still emphasize the whole concept of highest and best use, just like potential, is much more of the legal concept. And that's why even in the whole highest and best use principle, the legal permissibility is always investigated first. Because if the legal limitations of the property cannot be changed, then whatever assumptions you use on the physical side as well as the economic side cannot come into play.
That's a sequence.
Yeah. So firstly, your legal restrictions, and the legal restriction, you look at the real rights, the zoning, and then the personal rights. Then the other two come later. Other people say 4, but the maximum productivity criteria is connected to the economic feasibility or economic possibility. Okay, this is more of an American term. So, best strictly speaking, there are 3 criteria for which define the concept of highest and best use. It's that use which results into the highest value of the property. However, that use need to be legally permissible and then physically possible as well as economically viable or feasible. That is the concept of highest and best use. Please, these 2 terms are extremely important in valuation. Extremely important in valuation. And I would urge you, especially on potential, extremely important, at the same time, sometimes abused. misused.
Misused.
Yes. And that's why there is a whole literature and of court cases, especially on the concept of potential. If you've got the first year notes on those case studies that we did on court cases on law, the bulk notes that I gave you, there are a number of cases on the potential of the property. Just for interest's sake, go and read those. Yeah.
Okay.
It is very much subject to disagreements. Other people, especially in expropriations, when they are expropriating property, a lot of people claim, no, my land has potential for a hotel, so you pay me for a hotel. Yeah, but so for those reasons, there are usually a lot of disagreement based on the concept of potential. Otherwise, potential, strictly speaking, is a genuine term in valuation which is acceptable, but it has to be within the given criteria. Exactly. Okay. I think that's where I would like to end our first discussion for today. So please go and read and understand chapters 4 and 5. They are very simple but extremely interesting topics. Chapter 4 talks about the potential, and chapter 5, the concept of highest and best use. These are very important standard concepts in valuation. They are real and they need to be followed. All right. Any comment?
No, I think it's clear.
Okay. Can we take a 15 minutes break?
Okay.
Then we come at 1:45.